If we can just realize that right now, oftentimes like we'll never be happier than we are right now, because we think that like we'll be happier in the future. The joys in life are actually just raising our current day-to-day happiness, and not even the highs and lows, but actually just the baseline. Raise your baseline happiness right now.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to this interview episode of A Call to Leadership. We are going to explore the importance of inventiveness in business, how it can help us revolutionize our organizations. I can't wait for you to join me. And special guest, PJ Accetturo, is back on the show as we dive deep into creativity, leadership, the role of the CEO, and how to harness our abilities to enable new paradigm shifts, to get inspired, to get motivated, to empower us and others to take our businesses to the new heights. PJ, so good to have you on the show today, all the way from sunny Florida to sunny St. Louis. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. I've been following the podcast for a while. Been obviously a student of yours for a while, a friend of yours for a while longer. So it's a huge honor to finally make it to the top of the mountain at this great summit.
Oh, nice. I love it. Well, man, you know, when we first met, I was actually encouraged by a fellow mentor who was shepherding us both at the time. That you and PJ, there's this guy named PJ. Let me just back up. In the group, and we were part of a mastermind. You had joined earlier than me. You guys are going to hit it right off. And he was dead on, because your heart, your mind, your vision, your trajectory, your life philosophy is so in line with mine. And not that we have a monopoly on the best possible way to live, but there's a lot of congruency, man. And I'd love to just kind of unpack that and unpack a little bit about your story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure as the audience will hear in the podcast, I think it's interesting to see, you know, there's a lot of ambitious people I've met, a lot of, people with great values I've met, but when there's kind of a congruence, like you said, of like high ambition, high excellence in, you know, sort of the quality of your craft, and then a really high value system, and kind of a merging of those three things. I don't meet those people a lot of times. Usually it's like a Venn diagram sometimes of like 2 of 3 of those things. So anyway, there was a lot of just shared brotherly connection,
absolutely,
like, kindred spirits. Anyway, so yeah, just excited to jump into it.
Yeah, man, for sure. So I'd love to just get the audience up to speed on some of your background, because, you know, you've transitioned from artist to entrepreneur.
Right.
And our conversations around this it's not always an easy transition.
Right.
Sometimes there's situations to where the artist is uncomfortable, is unsure, is unclear on whether or not this transition will be fruitful, whether I should stay in my lane, or I should embark on a new adventure. And I'd love to just unpack a little bit about your journey in this space, because I think it's really relevant right now. Yeah.
Well, if I'm as always, if I'm thinking about this from a listener's perspective, of like, why should I give a shit about PJ? Or I don't leave that out, but why is this worth listening to? You know, I, over the last, few years, started off as a filmmaker. I'm 32 now, grew a YouTube channel to 1 million subscribers, and now have a major TV series that I created that's getting launched on June 6th, which will be afterwards. So it's called Ghost of Ruin. It's been a crazy journey, because we launched a major crypto company instead of like a major network. So going from, being a broke filmmaker not that long ago to being on, one of the most profitable crypto platforms, running one of their preeminent shows in a space of actually a relatively short amount of time, has been an insane journey. So I'd like to hope that if there's a listener who is an artist and yet also doesn't want to be locked into trading time for dollars, but wants to open up, how do I become an artist that leads other artists and then creates amazing things through the power of teams, right? Yeah. That's what I hope to inspire today.
Absolutely. And I mean, even I hate to even use these words, air quotes, your age.
Sure.
But, you're you're just out of your 20s,
right,
very recently,
right, yeah.
and you're embarking on some really exciting stuff. And even the term, let's just break it down, artistry, right? Because people tend to shy away from even labeling themselves as artists, but I think there can be artistry and an artist's heart in any kind of profession, right? I mean, we're talking about creativity. We're talking about curiosity. We're talking about invention, discovery, exploration, right? Those are all aspects of being an artist. How do you frame that construct?
Yeah. I mean, from my, kind of Christian background and worldview, I believe that God is a creator, and, kind of we create in his image, and I just see that personified in every person I meet, having grown up sort of as a artist, as culture would define me, from being a photographer, filmmaker, et cetera. It's easy to see that in my own life. But I think when I talk to people, even just doing, like you said, like tax accounting, I think where there is mastery, there is artistry. Right?
That's good. Yeah. And interestingly, like I never wanted to hang a shingle out that said creative accounting because I felt that all my clients would get audited. But indeed, there's a creative aspect about mastery, right? As a singer, so there's that creativity that I do believe it feeds into mastery in whatever we do. So let's talk a little bit about were you always creative? Were you always have the artist heart? And let me just preface that, like I studied Walt Disney at length, and ever since he was young, he was drawing. When everyone was eating dinner, he was drawing. When his friends were outside playing, he was drawing. When the teacher was giving instructions in class, he was drawing. Right. I mean, he was an artist from day one. Was that your trajectory? Did you fall into it at a later date? When did you know that you were an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I always considered, and I guess I still do, myself a professional daydreamer. When I was a kid, I had terrible grades in school, almost went to like a school for special learning. I had such problems focusing because I have ADHD, I've come to find out later, that I thought I was dumb, and other people my teachers thought I was dumb. But, you hear that commonality story with so many great entrepreneurs like Walt Disney. And for me, it was just, struggle paying attention to things I just don't care about, don't find interesting, but, hyper focus, of course, with things you're endlessly fascinated by. You stay up late at night. I know you've done that too. And it's like, I think curiosity is so much more of a driver of us and what we will do than willpower, than discipline. Like, I don't care about any sort of discipline, routine, quote unquote, compared with the power of curiosity.
Yeah. In fact, studies and most of my research around entrepreneurship and vision formation and vision actualization, visionary leaders have a swath that runs across all of them where they are lifelong learners. They have an insatiable curiosity, and that curiosity drives invention. It drives innovation. It drives progress.
Right.
And so, this, and you wonder, are you born or are you made to be inventive? And I want to hear your opinion. I would argue though that I think that it's not an either or. I think it's an and in some ways, right? You certainly you can have inclinations with your DNA,
right?
But at the same time, your environment,
right,
it will nurture that behavior.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting tangent. So I think that some people view their life as like, if I can just get good at one thing and be the best at it or best in the world at it, you have a shot at having a great quality of life, having notoriety and all those things. But the problem is, like, for most endeavors and careers, like, it takes you 20 plus years to get there. And it's really difficult. You can't just, like, there's other factors. There's environmental factors on why you can't be the best athlete. There's, like genetic limitations on you being the best neuroscientist, like, or, physicist. So actually, for like entrepreneurs, it's better to be in the top 10 to 5% in 2 to 3 different things that sort of complement each other in new emerging ways. And that is where great leaders and great entrepreneurs, I think, are formed, in the convergence of, let's just say, skills like sales for Steve Jobs, mixed with sort of his engineering background, also mixed with his sort of taste in design. Those three skills, and he wasn't the best at any one of those things, but he was really good in all three things. But it created that with the time he was around and sort of the emergence of new waves of technology. He sort of used those abilities to create someone no one's ever seen before.
Yeah. And I think that ties right into context and understanding really three planes, I think, in context, which when we're talking about context, we're just talking about settings, right? So social settings, the place, time. And the first context to consider is the past, especially in childhood.
Right.
I think that plays a big part. And when you talk about Steve Jobs, he was enamored by the style of home that he grew up in California, which was these Eichler homes, and that was the designer, the engineering, and they were simple, but yet they provided so much value. And he was drawn to simple, high value, but it was not just the home. His father also adopted the same philosophy on simplicity, but excellence, but elegance, all in the same vein. I think so, as leaders, especially leaders who want to accomplish great things, take those individual giftings, if you will, but don't forget about the past and how they developed in some of the areas that you were inspired then, so that you can carry them into your future. I think that's important to consider, and that's the old context, of course. The childhood context. Of course, the current context is where we are today, and then the future context is where we want to take people along with us. I think if we can take those three items, as you had mentioned, and then look at them over the swath of these three contexts, and then begin to ask the questions. And it's not necessarily asking the questions about what does society need. I think it's even more relevant to say, what am I missing?
Right. All great products are born from great problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So usually it's helpful to walk through a bit of like how I got here and, kind of the story. Do you want little Reader's Digest on PJ? Cool.
Yes.
Okay. So, grew up in Florida, trying to think what's relevant. Parents were kind of poor growing up. My dad was like a youth pastor, so we didn't have much growing up. But one of the coolest experiences there's some issues growing up in the church, some baggage, but one of the coolest experiences was we were really encouraged to do mission trips. And that's like, for me, like my origin story of like learning the power of storytelling, because I realized as I was going, I went to like for 5 weeks at a time every summer in high school, Egypt, India, Morocco, Panama, just lots of different countries. A lot of times what was lacking was not swinging, hammers and nails in buildings. It was actually communicating between the needs that were abroad and then having relationships back with those who had plenty kind of in our context in the US. And I think that actually as storytellers is the best thing we can do is become a bridge, become an advocate, right? Between things you see that are great needs and then people who oftentimes maybe lack the feeling of contribution, the feeling of that their lives have significance. And then obviously there's like missionaries and nonprofit organizations that lack actual funds, volunteers. And so that was like my greatest, sort of revelation as a 15-year-old. It's like, yeah, I can kind of go back home and try and get a cool car and chase girls, but or could that's what we did. We like gave water to like people who had leprosy in India and like did just worked with like medical clinics and all these like really amazing things that other like even like teenagers that would come with me on these trips. And I was like, oh, maybe my life right from the get-go can have a bit higher of a calling. I don't honestly have to go through all the rigors of like being an angsty, emotional teenager that's just trying to find his place in the world. Not that like isn't important for a lot of Americans, but I think that sometimes we forget that like maybe you can skip a lot of like the, tumultuous phase of being a teenager. And so sure enough, from like 15 to 18, I was like in 3 countries a year. Wow. It was crazy. It was crazy. So yeah, it taught me storytelling, taught me the importance of it, taught me the gratification you get from being a part of, creating awareness and all that kind of things. But then I realized after I graduated high school, I had a gift through photography at that point. Then I didn't want to just go to school and, waste away for 4 years, bored entrepreneur. So then I heard about this opportunity in West Africa to live on a hospital ship for 6 months called Mercy Ships. I, get on the ship and kind of within, not long after being there, Discovery Channel, is trying to come on board. National Geographic's coming on board. National Geographic, ended up running my photos in one of their things. And so it was amazing to kind of be right place, right time, realize, wow, you can make a career out of telling stories that matter. And that's always been, even now, is continues to be kind of, I think my driving mission is, are the stories that we're telling more than just entertaining, now that we're kind of in the entertainment space, is there actually heart and substance behind it? And sure enough, like we're keeping that mission,
Do you think that's more the exception than the norm now? Or is there still
I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. We all like to delude ourselves that our lives are full of purpose and meaning. Maybe they are a lot. Maybe they're not. I don't always know, but at least I think the effort and the pursuit of that is what matters. I think everyone is like the protagonist of their own story. I don't think even like someone like, I don't know, Jeff Bezos or like the ultra capitalists, like they wouldn't even say to themselves, it's sort of everything's about profit. They would say to themselves, I'm trying to create a better world for my customers or something like that. So it's helpful amidst all of this sort of like flowery language we have with, being a part of a lot of these like businesses with a purpose. Like I don't know. We shouldn't delude ourselves saying that like we are changing the world in every capacity, because I think sometimes there's a little like exceptionalism in that, a little bit of white savior complex that comes with all these mission driven businesses that sometimes don't realize the ways in which they still also negatively contribute to the world, and also the ways in which, we just actually may not have a huge legacy that lasts us beyond our current lifetime. So like, we can try all our lives and maybe we still don't. I don't know.
No, that's a good point you make. Of course, you go back to the 70s and the mindset of the purpose of a business, Friedman's concept to, increase shareholder value, right?
Right.
Of course, that perspective 50 years later has shifted among many organizations to create a satisfying experience for all stakeholders. Now, not every company aspires to that, certainly, but I think that when we look at it from a generational perspective, more and more people in the up and coming generations are wanting more sense of purpose in their lives, and they're realizing that their lives are more than their career or their job or whatever. And I think even just recently, and I say young, my son, you said 15, he's just turned 15 and he's trying to conceptualize what a life might look like that he doesn't have to work as hard as his dad.
Right.
Where I never thought that. Like when I was growing up, and of course, these are just two pieces of a much larger population. But when I was growing up, I thought, I'm going to work harder than my dad.
Right. But also with the faulty assumption being that input equals output instead of how we know now, it's asymmetrical. It can be.
It can be.
Quality input can be astronomical output.
And I love that philosophy.
Yeah.
And I want him to embrace that philosophy, because if there's a way that he can live more fully without having to, because even you think about like the 40-hour work week, right? Somebody came up with that.
Right. The Ford, right? The Ford factory.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, why does that have to be the norm, right?
Right.
And so why does it have to? And this is, of course, we're talking about an American philosophy. Of course, you go to other countries and there's much different.
Yeah, and it's some of that can be a luxury, but I do think, like you talked about, like we like to think of ourselves as ants and worker ants, when really, at least as those of us in like who have the privilege of having an incredibly creative job where it's not always about sort of the amount of input, but actually the quality of your input. I think we need to actually reframe it to think that we're more like lions, like as great entrepreneurs, where we have intense periods like you did in the last 2 months as tax season of work, but then also intense periods of rest, because, really it's, especially as CEOs, the outcomes of our business are determined by the quality of our decisions. So making more decisions isn't always better. it's making better decisions that's better.
Yeah. I was just talking with a client, this reminds me of, and who's in nursing, and she works 3/16. Wow. And I asked, I said, 3/16? She said, you know what, Nate? I love it. I love it. I get 4 days off a week. And like you said, it's this lion mentality where I go in for the, for the quote unquote, the kill and do my best work. And then I get to rest.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and of course I haven't researched this, but I wonder how much of that is based on a primal human behavior pre-industrial revolution, right? Pre large community era of humanity that was that the way? And of course I'd love to have maybe even on a subsequent episode, get somebody else on here who is subject matter expert.
Yeah.
In that area. Anthropology.
Yeah.
But it does speak because I do agree that many entrepreneurs like to really punch it out, but then they really want to detach and take a break.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all need to be given freedom for both. Like we should have the freedom to work as much as kind of we want to within sustainable limits, because that's the style of some people's sort of work philosophy. But we also need to have the freedom that we don't feel like we have to do it for ourselves. But more importantly, I think we even don't have to lead that as an example for other people in our company. I mean, I know all roles can't be sort of like get the job done and your hours are your hours. But again, as a CEO now leading my teams, like I'm far, far, far more, I care more about them hitting their goals, exceeding their goals, than I do that looking like a specific sort of measurable 9 to 5. Like to me, you can do all the right things, and if you're not executing, it's not good enough. And you can execute way above and beyond, and I almost don't even care. Like to me, it's all about the results, and of course, how is it sustainable for you? Because I don't want to drive my employees to the bone where they hate working there and it's killing their families. Everything needs to be holistic, so that's then when communication, of course, they need to be communicating, and they need to feel like they can communicate to you, which we'll jump into with the Pixar book of managing creative employees, those open lines of communication. So yeah, it's a balance,
Yeah. But more, I think maybe even less of a balance and more of harmonizing and creating a masterpiece.
Okay, yeah. That's another tiny digression, because I think we like to default to the term balance as if everything's kind of a 50-50 split, like your 50 your time, your work. Tell me about the harmony way as an alternate way.
Yeah. So I was, of course, that's we're so accustomed to saying that, right?
Right.
Work-life balance and things like that. But then when you look at it, and some of our audience would have heard this, some of what we're talking about now with some other guests, and just toying with this vernacular, this language, to reframe it rather than try to create equal weighting for our activities, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Rather view it as though it's an orchestra and it's a symphony of sound that creates a beautiful masterpiece in our lives. Yeah. And different instruments might be different activities, and that when they play in harmony and sync, or at different times, some the bass player may play less than the flutist and pianist and so on.
Yeah, and that's a really good point for teams. Like not all teams, again, input has to match up to their output, or just in general, even if, I don't know, like different team members have different sort of time at which they put in the job. Anyway, I think something you talk about harmony, it made me think of another really key part of that process, which is listening. Like you have to listen to all of your sort of sensory experiences, your inputs coming in, to determine how to fluctuate sort of what you can control yourself. But I think one of the things we miss even beyond that is listening to your body. So I've been in therapy for the last couple of years, and it's completely changed my life. But a field of therapy is somatic therapy, which is therapy of the body. And so one of the things that like we've been going through is that your body is just a dumping ground of everything, and say your body, your mind, your soul, it's kind of all connected. But kind of non-cognitive is what I'm talking about. And so a lot of times our bodies will carry such stress, such weight, because, we have all these sort of labels and rationalizations on sort of warning signs or traumatic events that we're not accepting on a conscious level that our body keeps track of. And so, of course, it manifests in lack of sleep, anxiety, anger, all these sort of diet. Yeah. All these sort of kind of more on the negative spectrum of reactions to things that we're oftentimes not conscious of. And so I think as entrepreneurs, it's imperative that we do listen to our body, because otherwise I can't tell you how many stories we all know of CEOs that burn out, or CEOs that just don't have a high quality of life because they're constantly short with their team. They're doing all these things because they've been on overdrive for far too long and they haven't been listening to their bodies.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've made it a focus, a central focus, as the temple, right? Even in scripture, your body is a temple, and I look at it like it's on loan. Like I've borrowed this temple until it goes back into the dust, right? And I want to be a good steward of it.
Yeah.
And that stewardship is important because the better I treat it, the better use I'll get out of it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know it sounds so basic, but it's true. And it's like we tend to miss that, and we inject not only what we put in our bodies, but again, like how we treat it. Like, do we take deep breaths? Gosh, just a deep breath. I just started doing this probably about a month ago. Yeah, just like that. Just taking a deep breath and letting
into the microphone.
Yeah.
Sounded you.
Letting the oxygen just get to the brain.
Right.
And replenish. And also I think that deep breath does some other things too. It calms the spirit. Mm-hmm. It creates a centeredness.
Yeah. So some of the people, these people that, like, when you're hanging out in groups, they always are centering themselves, because, and one of the things I've worked through with my therapist is oftentimes that's because they're not centered as a person. They oftentimes feel, and I've been there too, where like you'll feel these inadequacies that only the laughter, the lauding of your peers, only attention can give. But really, we don't even have to even decenter ourselves in conversations like this. It's just to be centered. It's like the humility, right? It's not, the whole C.S. Lewis quote on humility.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's part of awareness. And like you said, the listening, I think that I don't think we can over discuss the value of listening. Right. And in whether it be listening to others, listening to our own hearts, listening to the environment around us, but also listening by design is a pause, right? And just taking time to pause. And we're so busy. Of course, not everybody, but those who have made significant commitments.
Right. Yeah, I think the busyness is a way for us to hide from all of our fears.
Wow.
I do. I think it's us anesthetizing all of these, I think, toxic ways in which just modern humanity is harmful to the body, the soul, the mind, and I'm addicted too, like my smartphone, I'm on it all the time. And I think that that's the release that I need to chill out. But I'm reading news articles that make me feel outraged. So then that gives me a dopamine rush, all of which, like you said, if I took deep breaths, walked around nature instead, it wouldn't continue the cycle of essentially hide, bury myself from the things I fear most in life, which are looking into a mirror.
So what do you fear most? I was going there. And
question of the ages.
Right. That's okay. The tens of people who are, our subscribers. No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, that's certainly, it is the question of the ages. But I think that you bring up a good point, because it's like the busyness gives us a sense that we are progressing.
Right.
But maybe we're not.
Well, yeah, because we like to think of ourselves based on external sort of validation and factors. And I think if we think that, like, yeah, I mean, whatever, I'm a good example because I just hit this huge milestone for, 15 years professionally been chasing, make a feature film or make a show or something like that. And I finally got it. But there wasn't this like, it's like, I don't know, getting to the top of the mountain or whatever, I mean, really it's like I'm living it recently. So it's interesting to talk about it now. There isn't this sort of like, oh, now I'm not a fraud anymore because I made it. Now I can prove those high school kids wrong. Because it's like, I think all of the things we experienced sort of before we hit our major milestones in life, we just ramp up our boundaries. Okay, yeah, I don't feel like a fraud to my like high school kids or like people in the past that I used to work for or whatever. Like I feel that validation, but now I feel like a fraud to a whole new cast of people. It's my investors, it's my producers, it's my employees, like, and it's the same with like then chasing, of course, as I'm sure you talked about with everyone, like chasing money. It's like, okay, if I had a goal of $100,000 or $1 million, sort of personal cash, sweet. Now I have a new goal. And we're endlessly dissatisfied. And I think they call it the like hedonic treadmill of just chasing hedonism, chasing like new things to get in. So I think if we can just realize that right now, oftentimes like we'll never be happier than we are right now because we think that like we'll be happier in the future. So I think it's all the joys in life are actually just raising our current day-to-day happiness and not even the highs and lows, but actually just the baseline.
Yes.
Raise your baseline happiness right now.
Yes.
The future will be what it is.
Yes, and it's a choice.
Right.
So my level of joy or satisfaction, and you can still be satisfied, I think, and pressing on. I think there's a relationship there. Once you reach a certain level of self-awareness and I can be happy and even joyful, and they're two different constructs, but I can be both in the moment. And I can be thankful. I think that comes back to gratitude. Living in a state of gratitude is one way to increase that median happiness level wherever I go. Because I find that when I encounter someone who is generally dissatisfied, it's dissatisfied of what they have not been given rather than what they have. And I've fallen into that. I've been, and it wasn't until actually I saw the movie Courageous. And in that movie, there's a scene where someone dies. I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen the movie. And one of the characters is lamenting over that death, as you would expect and as is natural to grieve. But then this character actually switches their mindset and says, I've been just really angry about what I've lost instead of being really thankful about what I've had. Yeah. And that actually, that changed my entire perspective on every relationship, on every day, on every moment. Right. Because this moment's the only guaranteed moment. So I'm thankful in the moment. In fact, that's what Paul says. He doesn't say be thankful for all things. He says be thankful in all things. And so that state of gratitude, it spans everything. So this conversation, I'm grateful in it. Whether or not I just got an email from a client who's moving on to another colleague. And with that mindset, I'm grateful for the time we had together. I'm also grateful that colleague now has food on their table that they didn't have before.
Right. And I think it's so much easier when you're in a place of abundance to let those things come and to let those things go with so much more ease, because you're in a practice of constantly controlling the narrative to what you choose, ideally, than what society would choose for you, what common belief should say to you, because like you said, everything, we have a frame and a label for it. And most of those are programmed into us that aren't necessary. Like things don't always have to be bad or good.
Right.
They really don't. And maybe I should frame this as like there are extreme trauma cases that we need to take it on, deal with it, go through therapy, mourn it, all those things. But for the vast majority of sort of things that throw up at us, like there's an opportunity in every challenge. Yeah.
which I think is a great segue to talk about the trauma that you might have faced over the last 15 years of moving into this position.
Yeah, good call. Knock, knock.
So I'll give you an example. From my upbringing, I had the kind of trauma that most, I would think, entrepreneurs would either identify with, maybe in different contexts. But for me, it was, I had a very close relationship with my mom, and she was my first investor in my new company. I bought my first company, and her and my other cousin, I bought it for my cousin, her and my other cousin lent me the money to be an entrepreneur, which was at age 21. Well, sometime down the line, my mom and I started to have friction, and it really went bad, man. It went bad fast. And we had, these blowouts, and it was like a real dark time that I had to realize that it was a tough situation to be in business with my family, if you will. And even though she was just an investor, it was still, her money. Yeah. And I wasn't able to pay it back, not in a timely way. And we had a lot of other family dynamics going on. I was leaving the traditional sense of what our family held as far as our family values. And those were like a huge deal breaker in our relationship. And it was really tough. And, we parted ways for a while, and it was heartbreaking because she was my rock when I was growing up, single mom, and my idol, my inspiration.
Right. It's like the hero's journey where, everything's sort of idyllic, home, and then an inciting event realizes you have to change, you have to leave, but it's a death, It's a death. It's a death of everything, comfort that's comforting, sacred, dear, and it's a necessary step because we don't grow otherwise, but it's probably, I think, where all great entrepreneur stories are born from, is some sort of wound in their childhood.
Yeah.
And we spend a life trying to fill that wound.
Yeah. So how about you?
Oh man. Yeah. It's hard. I think I do want to preface any sort of childhood wounds, to say, like, you got to give credit where credit's due. Cause I think sometimes we only focus on the ways in which maybe our parents let us down because, pain, we're like bioengineered to remember pain more than we are pleasure because, it's a survival mechanism. So I think sometimes it's important to just acknowledge, like, man, I had a lot of like areas in which I was supported and a privileged childhood in a lot of ways that I'm really thankful and grateful for. But there can be a reality that coexists in the midst of that, there's a lot of things that weren't fair to us as we were children. And, there's a really common mentality in entrepreneurs that's like, take ownership of everything, extreme ownership by Jocko Willink, and I believe in that. But I think the one context in which you can't take ultimate responsibility for things is when you're a child, when you're growing up, because you're not an adult. And it's okay later to realize, like, I don't have to take responsibility for the ways in which I coped with, in my case, like my parents had a really rough marriage for a couple of years when I was in middle school at my worst moments, when I was kind of finding myself as a 13-year-old, it's rough enough. And then you add your parents trying to mediate their marriage, trying to be their counselor, like all the pressure that has on a poor 13-year-old kid. It's just not fair, and it changes you. And so one of the things my therapist told me is that, like, the ways in which you cope with trauma in the past kept you safe then. For my wife, she gets really angry when things make her feel scared. And for me, I shut down and I get really, emotionally numb. A lot of guys do this. And it kept me safe then because I didn't have to process, all these feelings. I didn't have words for it. I didn't have language for it. I didn't have anyone to talk to. But now I repeat those same coping mechanisms with trauma, and it keeps me in bondage. So the things that kept us safe as a kid now keeps us in in bondage as an adult. And that's where the deep work of really therapy and personal growth, coaching, not all of this has to come to therapy, though I highly recommend it. But, the work that we have to do now is deconstruct all of these sort of false narratives that we constructed as a kid. Like, I'm only safe when I'm angry. I'm only safe when I'm numb. But those things inhibit our growth tremendously.
Yeah. It is so powerful when you talk about it in that framework, because the word therapy is almost a taboo word. Mm-hmm. And ironically, the word personal development, or the phrase personal development, or getting yourself a gym membership is praised.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay. So basically you want my body to look good, but my spirit can be in shambles.
Yeah. I was just telling someone close to me the other day that like, it blows my mind that like we don't invest more into therapy when essentially everything in our life starts with the self, right? Like every action we do, how we prioritize things, how we react to things, like everything comes out of sort of our framework for how we perceive and process the world. Why would that not be the thing we invest the most into?
Yes.
Because everything sort of is an extremity of that center.
And encourage it the most.
Right.
When tell me if this is wrong. When somebody tells you, now, of course, in a normal context, if you haven't been in therapy, that they're in therapy, you usually give them a consolation.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Like, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you get better. I hope you get better. That's like the most mind-blowing thing to be like, no, I have the human condition. It's a terminal diagnosis. Right. I won't get better. Yeah. I'm just managing with humanity. It's an ongoing condition.
Yeah. You tell them you enrolled, in a program, or in terms of like a certification, right, a college degree, right, again, a personal trainer. They're like, awesome. I'm so excited for you. I'm stoked, right? It's a completely opposite response. And I think we're missing it. I mean, right, we're majorly missing it. And just think, mental, spiritual health, emotional health. Right. Now, of course, we're moving in that direction, because, we've got emotional intelligence is, this whole philosophy of aspects of leadership is now, from the 90s is becoming more involved. Vulnerability, of course, Brene Brown's work is now being embraced. So I think we're moving in that right direction, but I think still you say therapy.
Yeah. Or we just think of therapy as if it's only about unlocking our childhood, but really, I mean, that's just the starting base of which therapy, these days, therapies help me a lot. And I do a session every week at this point. And I pay $145 a session, because that's how much, I believe it's an ROI, the ROI is infinite, just because it informs everything I do. And what we talk about now, we talk about a lot of childhood stuff, but really what we talk about now is how to process, the ways in which, the kind of deprogramming labels, for instance, in today's day and age, we think about, I'm tired, or I'm always tired, or I'm always or I'm sad, or I'm anxious, or I'm depressed, or all these sort of things that a lot of times we don't allow this sort of ebb and flow of being human, the human range. To me, it blows my mind to think that we should always be happy. We can always be optimistic, but the idea that we have this expectation that we're never going to be sad, or we shouldn't, or it's bad to feel tired, or all these things, it's just part of our experience of a healthy individual that has seasons.
Yeah. And I think it's necessary.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, how can you really know what true joy is unless you've experienced pain or sorrow?
I've got a quote for you. I don't have the quote, but the essence of the quote was something that sorrow creates crevices in our soul that joy is able to fill. And the deeper those crevices of sorrow are, the more joy we're able to have the capacity for.
That's good.
I nerd about the weirdest stuff these days. I feel like such a mystic sometimes, but
isn't that the case? Yeah. So say, for example, you're facing a very high challenge situation, right, or some kind of crisis, right? You overcome that crisis. Your joy level after overcoming it is far greater than the moment before the crisis began.
100%. Yeah. I mean, think about the people who are oftentimes the most grateful, grounded individuals are not people who had it easy the whole time. It's people who've been through the hardest things. I think of like Nelson Mandela, and you're like, how can you have that perspective when all these things happen to you? But it's those things that happened to him that caused him to have that perspective.
So that brings me to when life is going smoothly, we're in a state of comfort, do we manufacture those feelings? And I don't mean manufacture artificially. I mean create conditions that we can experience some level of tension and move into a victorious position after we've overcome an obstacle. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I would think the answer is always, right?
Right. Yeah, so this is a hard tension, and you're a good person to talk to about this, because I would say you're a eternally optimistic person, to where any hardship, you're seeking to find the lesson in the midst of it, and then the opportunity to come out of it, right? So yeah, I do think that obviously reframing the narrative, we talked about that before, like is imperative, but I also do think that sometimes we glorify the process of failure as if it in itself is sort of like a great process as an entrepreneur. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes we'll make it too much about the process of failure. It's like, good job, you're failing, like you're doing what it means to be an entrepreneur, you're taking risks. Like really, that's not the outcome we should desire. That's just, it doesn't have to be demonized. The outcome we should desire should be growth. And a part of the growth journey is failure, but we don't have to relish failure.
No, indeed. Yeah. And I tend to view failure, I've said this before, failure is not final, it's feedback, but then failure is simply feedback. It's just data. Yeah. Right. These are data points. Okay. This didn't work. This didn't work. That didn't work. Or maybe it worked and it didn't work the way I wanted it to work. Or maybe the desired outcome, you just go down the line of all possible outcomes and then you just add it to the playbook.
Right.
It's just that simple. And I think part of the important piece is just having an expectation that you're going to have new data every time that you have an experiment with whatever it is that you're doing that's new, some kind of a trial. I mean, unless you've driven down that same road 1,000 times, you're probably gonna make a wrong turn. Mm-hmm. But you're not. Nobody's gonna say, "Oh man, you failed. That's so awesome!" Right?
Right. But if you're driving down the road the same times, you're never gonna go anywhere new.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's it. That's it. So prepare to get lost.
That's good. Prepare. Ooh, that's a good bumper sticker. If I had a Jeep, I'd put that.
We've got one. No, that's good. That's good. So in the moment, we certainly don't relish the failure. I think if our perspective is that we're going to have a very clear road. And I think I remember watching Elon Musk talk about like his day recently, because he says he works a lot of hours. I mean, anywhere from 80 to 100 hours. He said, basically most of my day is putting out fires. Right. That was the exact words, putting out fires. And so he wakes up in the morning and he's like, okay, well, there's going to be a number of obstacles, number of challenges, number of problems. And those are the problems I'm going to have to help my team to overcome.
Yeah.
And I move on.
Yeah. I mean, and so essentially it's like, that's the job in a sense. Now, of course, I think ideally you're never devoid of problems, but at the same time, like, we should be striving to where our time is spent creating almost new problems rather than managing current problems.
Yeah.
As visionary entrepreneurs, we need to be starting companies to where those entities become self-perpetuating.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important, because if we're constantly focused on solving problems that continue to recur,
right,
then we're not progressing.
We're not, but we really aren't. It limits our ability to move beyond that. And I think a lot of times that I can't speak into any of Elon's problems because he's got big problems and I don't. He said anyway, but I think for us, a lot of times we micromanage as leaders, and that's why we still stay in the weeds, in the fires. We don't hire the right people to begin with that can solve problems before they bring it to us. So to me, that's what I'm always looking for is kind of superstars is they bring you a problem and then 3 solutions. Like that's the ideal sort of, ethos that, we want to imbibe at our company. But beyond that, that enables you to obviously focus on, the things that no one else can do. Because I think within a limits, anyone can put out fires once you've set, a company in motion.
Yeah.
Like it's not your ultimate responsibility once things are kind of in motion. Obviously, as a first time, your first year of entrepreneurship, second year building up a company, like you got to stay integral. But
yeah, no doubt. Yeah. And early on, you will wear quote unquote more hats, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you scale and as you have more resources, then it is time to hire and bring on the A players who share your vision, who ultimately my philosophy is whoever I hire for any given position must be able to do the work better than me, not just a little better. I use the word infinitely better, and I know that's of course, as you said, I'm a natural optimistic,
hyperbole,
right?
Yeah.
Definitely in hyperbole. But what that does is sends a message,
right,
and an expectation, and we have to be able to measure the expectation with real data.
Right.
And so that does is it sets the bar so that people know what is expected of them, but also if you don't think that you can get there, then that's a gatekeeper too.
Right.
In terms of even stepping into the organizational framework. And when I've said that to some of my team members, at times it's like people's eyebrows kind of like get raised, like, oh crap, I got to be able to do this better than Nate.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, yes.
Right.
Yes, because if I can do better than you, then I don't have someone that can find solutions that I wouldn't know how to solve those problems.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because the beauty of A players, true A players, when you have them on your team, they solve problems you did not know you had.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful because I constantly have people saying, I solved this problem, I solved that problem. And I'm like thankful because I didn't even know I had that problem. And that's where that organizational cohesion really begins to materialize, and where the value proposition and the experience level is maximized.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd love to, speaking of this, so it can be really intimidating. So this is the reason I think a lot of times why we don't hire A players. One, because they're hard to find. 2, A players usually aren't having downtime and just waiting for people to call on them. Usually they're in motion doing A player things. So a lot of times to really get A players, you have to incentivize them to come from their current situation, their company that they're in, to yours, because you're creating, of course, a better future state. So that's one of the reasons I think we don't work with A players. And 2, I think also is because it's really intimidating to say, I don't know more than you in this particular given endeavor. I'm okay with that, and I need you to lead me. And we're all scared, I think, as leaders, of feeling like we don't have the answers because, whatever, insecurity, it's the image of being a leader.
Matthew McConaughey in the movie Reign of Fire. I remember this scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Okay.
So he comes in, he's ex-military, of course, this movie about dragons in the future, post-apocalyptic movie, right?
Yeah.
And so he's in the movie. He's got another actor who's the he's more of the antagonist, and there's a protagonist, and they go head to head, and it's Christian Bale is the other actor, and Christian Bale is a leader in his own right, and Matthew McConaughey is a leader in his own right. Matthew McConaughey is a dragon slayer. Christian Bale is just trying to keep his people safe. So there's this friction going because Matthew McConaughey wants to lead, but in terms of the dragon slaying, Matthew McConaughey is leading this. Did I say Matthew McConaughey twice? I don't know if I said it. Yeah. So anyway, at the end of the movie, they go into the dragon's lair, and Matthew McConaughey doesn't know the lair, but Christian Bale does because he grew up there. It's in London. And at this stage, the tides turn, and Matthew McConaughey says, "Now you lead, I follow."
That's a good moment.
And that's a moment where we as leaders, as strong as we are, have to relinquish, because if you know the terrain better than me to fulfill our goal,
right,
I need to not only relinquish it, but relinquish it with confidence.
Right. And then empower them to even do it better.
Yes.
It's like, it's not just like, okay, pay lip service, but it's like, guys, they're leading the way for this endeavor, you know? But I think that's where the beauty is, because every organization, you know, like, I mean, now I'm CEO of my company, but before, all I wanted was just the ability to sort of step up to the plate, lead well, and be equipped and resourced, and then kind of validated by, you know, my seniors to do that. So like, that's what all of our employees and our leaders and our C-suites and stuff want from us, is the opportunity to shine, and then the resources to do well, and then on the back end, validation and affirmation that we did a good job.
Yeah.
Right? You know. Yeah.
Reminds me of Pink's work, where he talked about when money's off the table, his book Drive. Right. That what did he say? He said mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
Purpose, yeah.
We're drivers. We're primary drivers. Of course, there's some generational caveats there, right. But certainly those are strong drivers for A players as well.
Right.
And when we can empower them, and first and foremost, as you said rightly, we've got to be recruiters. And Jobs and Disney and others have said that their primary role is recruiting in terms of,
right.
in terms of that HR piece. And so constantly recruiting. I was actually just at the DMV recently with one of the clerks there, and I was doing some recruiting because I thought, wow, you know what, you might make a great addition to our team.
Really?
Yeah. And so, that's the mindset, because I can see this individual as an A player in that particular role.
Right.
And just having the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important, because I think it also takes a bit of pressure off of us, to where we feel like we have to excel in all these sort of various verticals with our companies. I truly don't see myself as a superstar in almost any given vertical. I'm not. But again, I think as leaders, having the ability to be pretty good in a number of them, and then having vision, and then sort of the sales and sort of like the public messaging part of it, to bring it all together and to unify it all together. I think that's where, a true genius zone can be, is this sort of super cluster of sort of mid-tier genius zones combining into a good one. So I think that then provides freedom. Is like, okay, great. I just need to find, it's almost like you're assembling a sports team. I need a center. I'm not good at basketball, but whatever the other positions than a center are.
Forward and point guard.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and then you're essentially the coach,
Yeah. Yeah. And if you've got great players, it's just a matter of letting them do their thing, because you've already explained where they're going to the championship to win.
Right. Oh man. All right. I got another chapter 8 of this discussion is, should we just chase the championship? If we're going on the sports analogy. So I was just reading Quiet Strength by Tony Dungy, amazing book. And he said, when he got to the Colts, before they won the Super Bowl, he said, guys, if all we ever do is win the Super Bowl, it'll be a wasted opportunity. Like, we could have been better than only that. And it made me think, dang, like for us, we're growing an entertainment brand, I think probably becoming, hitting $100 million, for revenue for our brand, and then $1 billion, really $1 billion is kind of the Super Bowl of any big entertainment brand like we have. But, I talked to my team a bit, and I just want to keep reinforcing this. Like, if that's all we ever do is become just another Star Wars, and obviously it's insane hubris to say that, but that's the kind of vision we have to cast to our teams. Like, if all we ever do is just become a monolithic brand that makes a lot of money, it'll be a bit short-sighted of what our potential could have been otherwise.
So Tony Dungy is clearly moving beyond the transaction, and so are you. and the transaction a contingent reward. That's all it is. It's contingent upon your performance in a very specific area. And where he's moving and where you're moving and where I love to move is into transformation, beyond the transaction, into transformation. And so the transaction is going to be a carrot and a stick, right? But the transformation is an entire life journey that helps you to become all that is possible. And you talked about verticals. The Super Bowl is just a vertical, but it's not the whole picture. And I think that and look at it, even that's in the sports team, that's their job, right? That's their career. That's their technical skill. It's what they go to do every day. And what Dungy is saying, look, we can have so much more.
Right. Well, it's, and I think it's not even like more from a maybe per se capitalist view, because I think that's the default view we have is how do things have like a, money ROI, and that is the end all be all. But I think, when we think of impact, especially on like, for instance, on a sports team, there's so many better ways in which a sports team, Tampa just won the Super Bowl 2 years ago or whatever. And but I'm not sure about their philanthropic endeavors, because in my mind, we actually got to work with the Bucks when I was doing some advertising campaigns before, but they do have really good programs in the city. And I'd like to think that what if those programs made a bigger impact on Tampa's growth, Tampa's, sort of kids, underrepresented kids and those kind of communities, than, just sort of like a viral video of Brady throwing a Super Bowl trophy across boats, downtown on the water. Like, I just think of the sort of compound effects of a lot of the more purpose-driven aspects of our business that we'll never see, because at the end of the day, you can't take money with you on to the next life. No
doubt. Yeah, I've never seen a U-Haul following a hearse to the cemetery ever. Maybe in ancient Egypt that would have been.
Take your whole army with you.
Yeah. And all your wives. But no, that's a great kind of a tangent point to close us out. And the plight is far greater than simply a transaction or a monetary label, right? I mean, those are all necessary, but they're fuel, and they're only a part of a grander story. And I think that's a good sort of closing point, because you opened with talking about story, and that's what all our lives are, is a grand story. And I tend to look at it like, especially from a person of faith perspective, is that we're actually in a greater story, a bigger story than ourselves. And we're participants in that story. And we have tremendous opportunity with each moment we have to make the impact that we think somebody else should.
Be the change you want to see.
That's right. Hey, I got a question for you as we close this episode.
Yeah.
So one day, my friend, you too will be on that great summit, right? The end of the journey, and everything that you've done will be behind you. And I just have one question in a sentence. What would you have liked others to say about you in remembrance?
I think of the quote, what a man must be, a man must be. What is it?
What a man can be.
What a man can be,
must be.
A man must be. And I'd like to think that, like, I gave it my all, like I think all of us, we have these beautiful, indescribable sort of callings / like almost like compasses in our hearts. And, we can not pursue them for years, but I think someday we have that call to adventure, like in story, and every story we write, it's all, we call it the monomyth, because it's the story that persists throughout Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. We're in our normal place, and then there's some inciting event that gives us kind of a ledge to take a leap of faith off of. And I'd like to think that I did that, and I spared no risk, I spared no expense, kind of in holding back from others, from loving myself, loving my enemies, from loving, kind of all those things, which I feel like I see that modeled in the life of great leaders throughout history. I saw that modeled in the life of Jesus, and I want to continue on that legacy of like its impact above all else. Yeah,
you're on your way, brother. Thank you so much for being on the show. More to come. We're working on our series.
Yeah. Creativity Inc. Overcoming the unseen forces that stand in the way of true inspiration. I'm going to be talking about what is it like to combine artistry with entrepreneurship in the life of Pixar.
It's going to be awesome.
Can't wait to
forward
do
to
it.
having you back.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Nate.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Okay. Hopefully that close worked. It's so.
Well, my friend, you're going to have to wait until next week to tune in to hear about the meetings and the people and the stellar teams we create by eliminating the waste of waiting. But you don't have to wait to hear the show again, because this Wednesday, an expert will come on to talk more about leadership. I'm so glad you're here. You mean so much to this program, and I can't wait to be with you again.